What is every mainline Zelda game's biggest strength? To answer that, we have to start with the original Legend of Zelda. So as everyone loves to say, it just drops you in a world and says figure it out. No waypoints, no objective markers, no Ubisoft NPC calling you and telling you to use the D-pad to go left. You spawn in a field and an old man in a cave hands you a sword and that's it. The whole map is yours. That philosophy was radical in 1986, and most games at the time were just linear where you'd go right, beat the level, and move on. And Zelda of course changed that. While it definitely has its drawbacks, it also has something that guided games just can't really replicate, and this level of freedom didn't return to the series in the same way until Breath of the Wild 31 years later.
Damn!
Every game between them added structure and guidance for good reasons a lot of the time, and for the most part were all great games, but that specific feeling of a world being completely open with zero guardrails is almost uniquely the originals. It is very cryptic, and it does not age perfectly, far from it I think, and it is far from my favorite Zelda game, but as a philosophy it was ahead of its time by decades, which for a game made in 1986 by a small team in Japan who never had made a game quite like it, it is very impressive to think about. Now, if you enjoy hearing about the biggest strength in every Zelda game, subscribe and also check out this video after, where I go over the biggest flaw in every Zelda game. Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. I've gotten a lot of hate when I say this is my least favorite mainline Zelda game, but I don't hate it. I mean, look at this video I made in 2016.
And for this video, I'm gonna explain why you should not hate Zelda 2.
With that being said, the difficulty is brutal in all the wrong ways, the overworld is a slog, the side-scrolling combat has aged roughly as well as a celebrity who's 67% plastic.
What the hell is even that?
I've already gone into all of that in the flaws video, but this game does have things to love. The soundtrack here is just amazing, especially for an NES game. Where the first game had that iconic overall theme and not a ton else, Zelda 2 has this rich, nearly orchestral range of tracks that feel way bigger than what the NES should be capable of producing. The Palace theme is one of the most underrated pieces of music in this entire franchise, like the walls are closing in on you specifically, and it fits the tone of this game better than the game probably deserves. The town themes are warm and inviting, making you actually want to explore those spaces, which is impressive because the towns themselves are not that interesting. Even the game over screen has a haunting quality that sticks with you. Some of these tracks have had a long afterlife through remixes, arrangements, fan appreciation. Even as the game itself got left behind, if you've written Zelda 2 off completely, and honestly I can't really blame you, just pull up the OST sometime because it is a great collection of music. A Link to the Past is a game that figured out what Zelda was supposed to be. Before this, the series was 2 games deep and already pulling in completely opposite directions. The original was an open, cryptic sandbox, and then Zelda 2 was a side-scroller that had some RPG elements, and it felt like a different franchise at points. But A Link to the Past looked at both those and then said, here's what that should be, and just completely perfected it, so much so that the series has still followed that same basic formula for the most part. The Light World and Dark World structure is the heart of it, and the moment it reveals itself is one of the biggest twists in gaming. You pull the Master Sword, you feel like you're closing in on the end, and then you get dragged into the Dark World and realize you were barely halfway through. The world doubles in size in an instant. Areas you explored in the Light World now have twisted counterparts. Paths that seem like dead ends open up. The whole map you already know becomes something new and threatening. And the game doesn't even give you a moment to process it before throwing you back in. What makes it more than just a clever twist is just how everything around it is paced. The 3 pendant quests in the Light World teaches you the systems gradually without ever feeling like a tutorial. By the time you're deep in the Dark World, you're ready for everything coming at you. The dungeons in the Dark World are where the design really flexes. Like Thieves Town hides its bosses inside a jail cell you have to open. Turtle Rock throws multiple items to you simultaneously and expects you to juggle all of them. Each one feels distinct here, each one builds on its own logic, and there's basically no dead time anywhere in this runtime. To this day, I think it is a nearly flawless game. I don't think it's the best Zelda game, but for what it set out to do, it was amazing and completely set the structure for the Zelda series. Link's Awakening has no business having as strong a story as it does. This is a Game Boy game from 1993. The screen is tiny, the color palette is roughly 4 shades of green, and the whole thing fits on a cartridge with less memory than a Nintendo YouTuber who bought the Switch 2 a day after saying he'll never get it, and somehow it tells one of the most intriguing stories in the entire franchise. The setup sounds very strange here. Link washes up on Koholint Island, and the goal is to wake the Windfish, a giant whale sleeping inside a mountain, which will apparently let you go home. Already weirder than most Zelda premises, but as you play through it, the island starts to feel a little off in ways that are hard to pin down at first. Marin, the girl who finds Link on the beach, starts talking about wanting to leave the island and see the world. Very strange thing to say in a place that seems perfectly nice. The owl who guides you throughout the game gives advice that feels slightly too knowing, like he understands something you don't. Certain characters repeat the same lines in ways that start to feel less like dialogue limitations and more like something is wrong with them. And then there's the fact that the island is full of enemies from Mario games. Goombas, piranha plants, a chain chomp, which makes no sense in a Zelda game unless the world itself is being assembled from someone's scattered memories rather than existing as a real place. And spoilers for this game are coming coming up if you have not played it or don't know the story. The game slowly starts telling you the truth that Koholint Island might not be real, that everything you spent the whole adventure caring about might only exist inside a dream. The implications of that hit harder the more you sit with them. The friends you made, the people you helped, the world you explored, all of it exists because someone is asleep, and when you wake it, it's gone. Marin is gone, the whole island is gone. The ending delivers its gut punch with basically no fanfare, no big villain speech, just a moment of genuine loss on a Game Boy in 1993. It's kind of absurd that this exists, and I find myself thinking about it way more than I probably should for a game I played on hardware that looks like a brick. I also really love the overworld here, I gotta give a shout out to that, especially in the remake. The remake is my favorite version to play this game, but you can't go wrong with any of the 3 versions. I already put this at number 1 in my ranking, and a big part of why is that picking one thing it does best feels impossible. It does nearly everything at a level that shouldn't have been possible for a first attempt at a 3D Zelda. Ocarina of Time basically invented what 3D action adventure games feel like. Now, it was not the first game in this genre, it was not the first game to have lock-on combat from thin air, but it refined it so completely that it changed how 3D action adventure games felt from that point forward, and it's still influencing games today. It's just really hard to narrow it down to one thing here. There's the time skip, which remains one of the most effective narrative moments in the entire medium. Young Link pulls the Master Sword and wakes up 7 years later in a Hyrule that's decayed. Castle Town is overrun with re-deads, the Happy Mask Shop is locked up and abandoned, Lake Hylia is drained, familiar places are unrecognizable in the worst way, and the game doesn't soften any of it. The soundtrack also amplifies all of this. Saria's song, Zelda's Lullaby, the Gerudo Valley theme, the Lost Woods, some of the best pieces of music in gaming history. Then the dungeons are where it all comes together. The Forest Temple is eerie and distorting, with its twisting hallways, one of my personal favorites. The Spirit Temple sends you back in time mid-dungeon, which requires you to solve it as both a child and adult Link. Certainly is creative, if anything. There's even the Water Temple, and okay, maybe you know what, maybe that's not the best. But there's also characters like Saria, Darunia, Rudu, Naboro, Impa. Each one has a personality and a great arc for this game, which is part of the reason why that these characters are still fan favorites all these years later. I didn't even play this game until 2014 on my 3DS, and it still became my number 1 in the series. It's just kind of hard to put into words how fantastic this game is. And yeah, I know there's going to be people commenting saying that the game is far from perfect, and everyone's entitled to their opinions. This is just my take on it. Majora's Mask is the Zelda game that makes you feel like the world is actually ending, and more importantly, makes you care about the people stuck in it. Clocktown on the first day feels normal, people go about their routines, shops are open, there's a carnival being planned. By the third day, the music is slowed and warped into something deeply uncomfortable. NPCs who have been going about their business are standing at windows staring at the sky, wondering if someone else is staring at the same moon, connected by light. Speaking of the moon, this horrifying, grimacing, wrong-looking moon is taking up half the horizon, and the postman cannot bring himself to leave his post even with the world ending around him because his entire sense of self is built around doing his job, and the game treats that detail with complete seriousness. It's a level of bleakness Zelda has never gone back to, but has tried with Twilight Princess. The side quests are what makes it unforgettable. Andrew and Coffee is legendary for a reason. Spending an entire 3-day cycle helping 2 people find each other before everything is destroyed, knowing they've chosen to face it together, is one of the most devastating things in any game I've played, and the game is full of other smaller versions of that. The Romani Ranch sisters, the Deku Butler who you find weeping beside a hollow Deku tree near the end of the game, the same type of tree that Link was trapped in. The game never says it outright, but the implication is right there if you're paying attention, and somehow being left to connect those dots yourself makes it worse. I'm gonna be honest when I say I usually only do a handful of side quests in games. A lot of them just feel like filler to me, and I'm far from a completionist. Majora's Mask, on the other hand, really kept me engaged with a lot of them because it wasn't just some random dude needing the newest edition of Gruesome Monthly, but there was real weight behind these. All of this was also built in roughly 2 years using Ocarina of Time's asset, and somehow it feels completely different from Ocarina of Time. Now, I know a lot of people will also say the time system is the biggest strength, and for me that creativity is a big plus, and it also does rush you, and I kind of go back and forth on how much I like it. The Oracle games get overlooked by a lot of Zelda fans since they are Game Boy Color games with no remakes. Even though they are on ancient hardware, they still have a lot of really cool ideas. Aegis is one of the most mentally demanding 2D Zelda games ever made, and that time travel system is the engine behind all of it. Switching between past and present versions of Labrina is the entire framework of the game. Early on, you're doing relatively straightforward things, moving between eras to grow a planet in the past, you can climb it in the future, so you can climb it in the present. Like, alright, that makes sense. But the game never stops there. It keeps layering on top of that foundation until by the later dungeon, you're holding multiple timelines in your head simultaneously, planning several steps ahead before committing to anything. Understanding how an action in one era creates a consequence in another that you won't even see for another 10 minutes of gameplay. Mermaid's Cave is the peak of it, and one of the most cleverly constructed dungeons in the entire franchise. It exists in both the past and present simultaneously, meaning you're constantly switching between eras mid-dungeon and keeping track of how the layout of each version relates to the other. There are currents in the water that only exist in one era, switches that only activate in the other, and doors that require you to manipulate both timelines in the right sequence before they'll open. Cracking these puzzles is some of the most satisfying moments in the entire Zelda series, and while I like some of the puzzles in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom in the shrines. I don't know, the puzzles here just have a much different vibe, and I really like this game. But it's not even just Mermaid's Cave. The Skull Dungeon plays with time. Ancient Tomb also combines a lot of what Ages has built up across the whole game and throws it to you all at once. The puzzles outside of dungeons are no different. There's overworld sequences where you need to plant something in the past and return to the present to see what grew. I think if you're not a big fan of puzzles, you won't like this game, but I tend to like puzzles, so for me this is a big plus. Where Ages went deep on puzzles, Seasons went wide on world design, and the Seasons mechanic is one of those ideas that sounds fun on paper, but actually turns out to be more clever than you expected once you're actually in it. The Rod of Seasons lets you change each area's season at specific points scattered across the world, and each change radically alters how you move through it. Water freezes in winter so you can walk across them, flowers bloom in spring into platforms you can jump on, sunflowers in summer launch you across gaps you couldn't otherwise cross, fallen leaves in autumn pile up into soft landings that save you from drops. Like, it sounds like a fun gimmick, and in practice it means nearly every outdoor area in the game is essentially 4 different versions of itself, but I feel what really makes it click is just how specific and clever the applications get as the game progresses. Like, early on, you're doing the obvious things, like freezing light. But like, okay, that's pretty straightforward. But later the game starts building puzzles around seasonal changes that require you to think carefully about your route before committing. The Goron Mountain area throws this at you constantly, with the whole region being designed around seasonal layers stacking on top of each other. The best part is how it affects the pacing, though. You try something, it doesn't work, you change the season, it does. Getting stuck in Ages can feel like hitting a wall and staring at it, but I feel like getting stuck in Seasons is a lot less frustrating. Also, comment if you want to see these games remade, because I really love them, but I think if it got the Link's Awakening treatment, that we could get an even better version of them. Wind Waker gets a lot of credit nowadays for its art style, and rightfully so, because I think it aged beautifully. While most quote-unquote realistic games of this time look like melted plastic, but I feel like the art style is honestly secondary to what Wind Waker actually does best, which is make you feel like you're on a real adventure, something a lot of Zelda games don't quite hit on. So I have to be specific about this, because when I say the sense of adventure, I don't mean the actual act of sailing the Great Sea, because truth be told, it can be a little repetitive at times, but one thing I will say is that it feels like you're on a grand journey here. Like when you first push off from Outset Island, it's just cool to see islands that are just barely visible in the distance, and that curiosity kind of makes you want to explore everything in the Great Sea. Some islands are elaborate puzzle areas, some are tiny platforms with a single chest, some have whole characters with actual personality. Windfall Island has a whole ecosystem of side quests and characters that feel like they exist independently of Link's journey. Dragon Roost Island has Medley and the Rito tribe, a whole civilization that evolved to grow wings and carry mail across the sea, whose entire way of life is built around the fact that they live in the middle of a vast ocean and learn to work with it rather than fight it. And of course they are evolved versions of the Zora, which I think is a very cool concept, because obviously the Zora would just be too overpowered in this universe. The Ganondorf in this game also deserves more credit than he usually gets. He's not a shadowy, cartoonishly evil villain, but he's reflective, he's bitter, he's weirdly understandable. His speech at the end about the winds of Hyrule is one of the most surprising moving moments in the entire franchise. Now, it's always cool to see Ganondorf in a game where he's just over-the-top evil, but I really like this version of him where he feels a lot more personable, where he feels like he has more motivations. I feel like Wind Waker is still pretty divisive because a lot of people still hate the art style, a lot of people think that the sailing can get boring, but especially Wind Waker HD, I think it's a fantastic game. I really love the sense of adventure, and I think other games in the series have tried to replicate the sense of adventure, but they haven't always succeeded. So in my opinion, Four Swords is not a great game. I'm just going to say that up front so we're all on the same page. The hardware requirements to actually play it in the way it was intended at the time were absurd. Multiple Game Boy Advances, multiple link cables, friends who also own both, which in practice described immediately 11 people per country. Trying to experience it in the intended way now mostly reveals a proof of concept wearing Zelda clothes. But the concept itself was worth proving, because if you could actually get people to play it, it's actually a decently fun game. Now, I don't think the gameplay here is anything that crazy, but that of course is the biggest draw of this game. Just being able to experience a mainline Zelda game with friends, being able to mess around, and it is much easier to play now being on Switch, but that's really all I have to say about it. And then on to Four Swords Adventures, which obviously takes the blueprint of the original and just builds more on it. Being on the GameCube instead of the GPA allowed it to be a lot more, and it's basically just a better version of Four Swords. Just feel like the puzzles are better here, the combat's better here, and that's about it. They are fundamentally similar games, but Four Swords Adventures is just a more fun game. The Minish Cap is one of the most slept-on games in the franchise, and I'll keep saying that until we get a remake. Developed by Capcom, it understood the Zelda formula well enough to build one of the most creative overworlds the series has ever produced. And the reason I say that is because it has the shrinking mechanic, which is integrated beautifully here. Scaling down Link to Minish size takes a perfectly ordinary Hyrule town and turns it into something completely different. A Kraken Wall becomes a passageway to something else entirely. A countertop becomes a full platforming section. A garden becomes an outdoor area with its own logic and secrets. The game has this incredible density because every environment exists at 2 scale simultaneously. And the game is constantly inviting you to think about what that means for wherever you happen to be standing. What stops it being a gimmick is how consistently it's applied. The dungeons use it, and exploration uses it. Unlocking secrets often requires shrinking down to find things completely invisible at normal size. The sprite work is some of the best the GBA ever produced, and the soundtrack is just completely underrated here. The whole thing is just a very tight, complete adventure that leaves you wanting more. It is a short game, and that's a bit of an issue I have with it, but the experience here is just so great, and I love everything they fit into a GBA game here. If you ask most Zelda fans what Twilight Princess does better than anything else in the series, one of the answers you'll get very often is dungeons. And in my opinion, they're right. This is the peak of traditional Zelda dungeon design, and while I think it has some close competition, I just think every dungeon here has its own personality, and not just visually, but in how it actually plays. Now, of course, like any Zelda dungeon, each one is going to introduce a central tool or idea and build an entire experience around it, but the ideas and themes here are just so fun. There's the spinner in Arbiter's Grounds, which outside of this dungeon is barely used, but it is really fun here. And the Stallard boss fight where you're riding it is one of my favorite in the entire series. Snow Peak Ruins might be my personal favorite dungeon in the entire game. The premise alone, which is a mansion up in the snow owned by friendly Yetis, is unlike anything Zelda has done before, or really since. You're smashing through ice walls with a ball and chain while Yeto wanders around humming to herself and occasionally trying to kill you because she's been possessed. Temple of Time is obviously trying to do a lot with nostalgia, but has some impeccable design. City in the Sky is visually stunning, and one of my favorite concepts for a dungeon ever, where you're literally in the sky and navigating across this floating city. And beyond dungeons, another big strength is Midna. So Zelda companions have been very hit or miss. Not many people are a big fan of Navi. No one pretty much is a big fan of Fi/Fi, whatever you want to call her. But Midna is still a fan favorite to this day. She starts sarcastic and manipulative, and she's using Link for her own purposes. But then as the course of the game goes on, she becomes a much better character. And then the moment her true form is revealed after Zant nearly kills her, you have to race across Hyrule Field to get her to Zelda in time. It's just one of the most urgent and emotionally charged sequences in any Zelda game. And then the final scene, which I'm not going to spoil here, has no business hitting as hard as it does. Twilight Princess is a lot of things, but above everything else, it has some incredibly high highs. Phantom Hourglass is a game I have a complicated relationship with. The Temple of the Ocean King overstays its welcome so badly it starts to feel like the game is mad at you, and the touchscreen controls require an adjustment period that some people have just never gotten through. This is all fair criticism, and I've talked about all this before, but there's one design idea buried in this game that I think is quietly brilliant and never gets the recognition it deserves. A big chunk of progression in Phantom Hourglass is based on knowledge rather than items. You write notes directly on your C-chart using the stylus. If an NPC tells you a specific island has something worth finding, you can mark it yourself. There's no automatic waypoint, there's no quest tracker. The game trusts that you wrote it down, and in the Temple of the Ocean King specifically, you scribble clues directly onto the dungeon map. Things like which floor specific switches on what order to hit things, on where a hidden path is, and those notes carry over into every subsequent visit. Later in the game, when a door would normally require an item you haven't found yet, sometimes you can bypass it entirely because you already know the combination or the route from the information you collected on a previous run. In most Zelda games, you're just going to need the hookshot to cross the gap, but in Phantom Hourglass, sometimes you just need to have written down what that NPC said 3 islands ago. The game just bets that you paid attention, and when you did, it feels really rewarding. It's genuinely a great idea inside a very frustrating game. And also, I feel like this is barely ever talked about when it comes to Phantom Hourglass, but we do have to give it credit for some things. Spirit Tracks really doesn't get enough credit either, and a lot of that is because people just refer to this as Zelda with a train. Now, I understand that the game is called Spirit Tracks, it has a train, but what this game does with its central character, making Zelda an actual presence with actual personality for the whole adventure rather than just a plot device, is something the series has rarely done before this, and it's really only done a couple times since. For nearly the entire runtime, Princess Zelda is a real active participant. She loses her body early in the game and spends the whole adventure as a spirit possessing phantom armor, fighting alongside Link and helping solve puzzles. She's there for the whole thing and actually has a personality. Spirit Tracks Zelda is curious, sarcastic, occasionally dramatic, and her reaction to being outside the castle for what feels like the first time really adds to her character development here. And then the puzzles designed around controlling her in Phantom Armor is clever too. Overall, I think Spirit Tracks suffers from a lot of the same issues as Phantom Hourglass, but just has a better central dungeon and better characters overall. Skyward Sword is probably the most divisive mainline Zelda game, and I've already got into what holds it back, which is the linearity, the original motion controls, Fee explaining every puzzle before you can even look at it. All of that does add up to have some pretty big flaws here, but what Skyward Sword gets right, it gets more right than pretty much anything else in the series, and I honestly don't think we give enough credit for that. I know I mentioned that Spirit Tracks had a great Zelda, but so did Skyward Sword. Link isn't going on a journey to rescue someone he barely knows. This is a story about two people who actually grew up together, actually care about each other, and get pulled apart by something neither of them asked for. Zelda is a real person here before she becomes a simple, and the opening hours of Skyloft do something most Zelda games skip entirely, which is actually make you care about some of the characters and the world. And then of course things go wrong very fast. The soundtrack is also extraordinary, like some of the most ambitious orchestral music in the series ever produced up to that point. The composers here all made major use of live orchestral recordings throughout, and the difference is immediately obvious the moment you boot it up. Ballad of the Goddess, the Galactos fight, the final Girahim confrontation, all of it is just amazing here. And then the dungeons here are also really great. Ancient Cistern is the best example because on the surface it looks like a serene Buddhist temple, beautiful. Clean water, golden statues, peaceful music. Then you descend into the lower half and everything flips. The water turns black, the statues are corpses, Skulltulas hang from the ceiling, and the whole tone shifts into something unsettling. The dungeon is also built around the contrast between those two halves, and it goes way beyond the aesthetics. The upper section has you using the whip to swing across gaps and activate mechanisms in clean open rooms. And then the lower section, of course, has all the crisp goblins and everything. I also have to mention the art design of Skyward Sword because it may just be my favorite in the series. It doesn't have the over-the-top cartoonish look of Wind Waker, and it doesn't have the more realistic look of something like Twilight Princess. Like, it just has that very watercolor look, and I really love that. For A Link Between Worlds, this was one of the easiest choices for me in the video. It's the merge mechanic. I mean, what else would it be? This is honestly one of my favorite gimmicks in any video game ever made, and it's such a simple idea you would think would have been used before in the series. Merging into a wall lets you slip through gaps, cross chasms along the edges, approach puzzles from angles that shouldn't exist, quite literally. Every dungeon is built around this, and the best of them use it to create challenges that couldn't exist anywhere else. You're constantly shifting your perspective, and the game keeps finding new ways to make that feel surprising. And you may think that it gets boring after some time, but no, I never once got bored using this mechanic. And this is, of course, a more modern version of The Link to the Past, which I said is nearly a flawless game, and I think this really just expands on it. Same great overworld, another dual world twist that doesn't hit the same as the original, but is still pretty cool here. There's the item rental system, which some people do love. For me, it's not my favorite thing, but I don't mind it either. And the music here is nice because it remixes a lot of A Link to the Past tracks while adding some new ones. Honestly, this is probably my favorite 2D Zelda, and it might just be because it takes A Link to the Past, which was also one of my favorites, and just adds this amazing mechanic. I don't think many people are going around saying TriForce Heroes is their favorite Zelda game, but I do think it gets a little overhated at the same time. The multiplayer was far more accessible when it came out, since you could play with friends both locally and online without any sort of cable, and you could actually play with randoms but had barely any communication. It was actually a pretty fun game to just sit down with 2 other friends and play this game cooperatively. There's a feature called toteming in this, where you would have the 3 links stack up and then that would be used for certain puzzles. You'd also sometimes need everyone to divvy up different tasks and not just have one person do all the work. And remember, this is almost purely a dungeon crawler, so it's filled with puzzles. It does start to get repetitive after a while, and it doesn't feel like an adventure like the other Zelda games for the most part, but I had a good time with this, especially as someone who got it on launch day. And in a game that's pretty bare bones like this, the puzzles are the main thing that stood out. I also want to give a shout out to the outfits because they were a cool part of the game. Besides giving Link drip, they would actually give you special abilities like increasing your power and speed or letting you see the contents of the chest. Again, like I mentioned, this is not anyone's favorite Zelda game as far as I know, but there actually are things to love here if you give it a chance. For Breath of the Wild, you can go with a lot of things here. It changed what people expected from open world games, and I don't think the sense of discovery here has been matched in any other game I've played. Even 50 hours in, the game still finds ways to catch you off guard. But the Great Plateau is one of the best opening sequences in gaming because of how deliberately it hands you control. By the time you leave it, you have a full set of abilities, a basic understanding of the physics, and a view of the entire map. Death Mountain becomes visible in one direction, Hyrule Castle looming in another. None of it is labeled at first, and the game nudges you towards Kakariko Village early on. But beyond that, the route is yours. Just the world and your understanding that you're going to figure it out yourself. What follows is one of the most rewarding exploration loops ever built. The geography pulls you forward without telling you where to go, because if you see a mountain, you can climb it, and from the top you can see 3 things worth investigating. You might head towards one and find more things that you want to check out, and that loop almost never stops. And also, the Sheikah Towers and unlocked sections of the map don't fill in points of interest automatically, they just show you the terrain. Then you have to look at it and decide what's worth finding. It's the difference between a game handing you a checklist and a game handing you a landscape. And then another big strength here is the physics system. When you can set grass on fire to create an updraft that carries you over a wall you couldn't climb. You can use stasis to freeze a boulder and keep hitting it, so then when you get on it, that's going to go flying into the sky. You can use magnesis to rip a metal chest out of a lake you didn't even know was there. Or you could discover that a lightning storm will electrocute enemies standing in water, or electrocute you if you have metal on you. The survival systems feed into this too, because you have to manage temperatures if you're going to a snowy region or a hot region. I also feel like the shrines get undersold sometimes too. There's over 100 scattered across the map, and each one has its own little puzzle. So some of these are not very good, some of them are not even puzzles, but I feel like a good amount of them were pretty rewarding. And even besides actually going in the shrines, just finding them across the map is really satisfying. Now I know people say this isn't a real Zelda game, and whatever you think about Breath of the Wild, that's your opinion, but nothing will beat the feeling of just going outside for the first time and just seeing the whole world. It's one of my favorite moments in gaming history. And now we move on to the sequel, which has maybe one of the hardest jobs any Zelda sequel has ever had. Breath of the Wild, of course, set a super high bar, even more so redefined what the bar even was. Following it with anything less than something truly ambitious would have felt deflating. And depending on who you ask, it was deflating, but I feel that it just expanded the entire formula. Gave you new abilities, had 3 layers to this world. You had the surface of Hyrule, which of course had a lot to find. Above it was the Skylands, which were new environments with their own logic and secrets built above the world you already knew. But then below it, which wasn't even in the marketing, was just a complete underground world as large as the surface. I remember when I discovered this for the first time, it didn't match the sense of discovery of the original Breath of the Wild, but I didn't realize they added a whole nother map into this game and just didn't tell anyone. There's just a ridiculous amount of content here, following up a game that also had a ridiculous amount of content. I also gotta say, I do like the new abilities here better. Now, I really do love Stasis, I do miss it, but there's Ultra Hand here, which lets you build essentially anything within the physics rules of the game. Ascend can actually be used pretty creatively here, and it opens a lot of opportunities when you think there's none. There's also Fusing, which adds weapon crafting on top of everything else. Ganondorf here is extremely threatening, even if I don't think he was used the best here. And also, that final boss was brutal. Now for the sword, I do think it's better than Breath of the Wild. I don't think it's one of the best in the series, but it did keep me more intrigued. Like, I was really curious about what was going on with all the time travel. And the twist at the end actually did shock me, like I did not see it coming. Or I shouldn't even say the twist at the end, because you don't necessarily find it at the end. Say what you will about Tears of the Kingdom, you can say it's a DLC or whatever, but it did greatly expand on Breath of the Wild, and I think that really is a huge plus. And now we find ourselves at the most recent game as of now, Echoes of Wisdom. So it did something no mainline Zelda had done before, and it put Zelda herself at the center, gave her a completely new way to interact with the world, and then steps back once you figure out what to do with it. So the ecosystem is the entire game, and it does hold up the whole way through. Instead of just collecting items that serve one specific function, Zelda scans objects and enemies she encounters and can summon copies of whatever she wants. Trembling might get you over a wall, a water block can fill a pool and let you swim to a higher ledge, a dark nut, which is one of the toughest enemy types in the game. The solution space this opens is bigger than nearly anything else in the series, maybe besides Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, because there's usually not one set answer to different things. Sometimes it can feel like you're kind of just brute forcing your way through a puzzle, and the game doesn't punish you for that, it allows you to do that. And I feel like finding solutions that the game didn't necessarily plan for while using all these echoes is actually a really creative idea, and while it's not my favorite gimmick in the entire series, I really do like when Zelda games do change things up like this. I think Echoes of Wisdom is far from a perfect game. I think the combat here is not the best, but it certainly is not afraid to try out some new ideas. And anyway, that is what I believe to be the biggest strength in every Zelda game. It is literally impossible for you to agree with every single thing I said in this video, so I want to know, what do you think the biggest strength in every Zelda game is? And also, if you have not, be sure you subscribe and check out my video going over the biggest flaw of every Zelda game. I also have some other Zelda videos you might be interested in. If you want to talk more about Zelda or anything gaming, be sure to join my Discord as well, and I'll see you next time.